Hey everybody, Jake from Barnstorm here. Today I'm going to introduce you to our mid-control kit for Indian Challenger models, as well as walk you through the installation process. If you're not familiar with the mid-control kit, it is designed to delete the floorboards from the motorcycle and shift your foot position back a little bit so that when you're sitting on the motorcycle, your leg is in a more 90-degree position. Our mid-control kit pairs very well with our dash relocation kit. If you're not familiar with that, the link is in the description below. That kit allows you to run a set of T-bars on the motorcycle, as well as relocate your ride command and your stock gauges to what we feel is a little bit more of an optimal location, and put the combination of both parts put you into a little bit more of an aggressive riding position, and I think opens up some of the potential of the motorcycle platform. So now I'm going to walk you through the components that will come in your mid-control kit. Just so you know, this is the kit in black anodized finish. You can also order it in mirror polished aluminum or raw machined aluminum should you want to color match it to your motorcycle. So starting on this side of the table, you will receive, assembled as shown, your new stator cover with the logo cover mounted, your new brake lever mounted. This is your new peg mount. With a small detail to note here is there's a 1032 Allen set screw in there that allows you to set and adjust your peg ride height. And you can see this is just a really nice, beautifully machined cover. All our machine work is done in the United States. So this is also where your new brake master cylinder is going to mount to. So if we transition over here, these are your new brake components, brake line adapter, and banjo bolts and banjo fittings, as well as your new master cylinder and hardware. So this stuff mounts up on here, which you'll see in a few minutes in the installation. And then the last cover here is your shift side cover, which will also come assembled as shown. And just so you can see the back side as well. Very nice, very nicely machined, bronze oilite bushings on all the pivot points. So you've got nice smooth action. And then we will also have included in the kit your new shift rod linkage components. So you also will receive two small triangular covers to cover up where your stock floorboards mounted and the associated hardware, as well as new gaskets for your stator cover, your cold start cover, and brand new bolts to mount your stator, because you're not supposed to reuse those bolts once they've been torqued once. And then also one other option available with the kit is you can order with the kit with pegs from us. These are the flow pegs in black to match the black anodized. If you order the peg option, you will also receive these very nice stainless steel machined bolts to complete the kit, and the spring washers as well. If you order the mid-control kit in the raw machined option, it's going to come disassembled, unlike when you order the black or the polished option. So I just wanted to go over the assembly process involved with the raw machined kit. So basically, these are the components you're going to receive in this fashion. So none of the hardware is assembled and none of the parts are put together. So when you unbox your kit, these are the primary components you're going to find. You've got a new stator cover and a new cold start cover. This is your brake side and this is your shift side. The corresponding shift and brake lever pivot pins are here. Your longer one is for your brake side and your shorter one is for your shift side. We also supplied the correct hardware. It's a washer and a nylock nut that go on the back side of each one of these pins, as well as the 1032 set screws that go inside here that allow you to set your peg angle. Also, your new logo cover, which mounts onto your stator cover. We also supply the 3 button head screws you need to do that. I recommend you throw a little blue Loctite on them once you're all said and done. You also will get a new brake lever and shift lever assemblies. The shift lever is manufactured in 2 pieces, and they assemble in a dovetail fashion, like so. We supply a bolt for this, and if you're ordering the raw kit, we also supply some 638 Loctite product, which we recommend once you've done your final coatings and you're ready to finish assemble this. You coat the mating surfaces of this assembly in the Loctite and then bolt it together. And the Loctite is just a little bit of a safety overkill type precaution that we like to do on this fitment. So the reason we supply the raw machine kit shift lever unassembled is so that you can do your coating options to these two components. And the reason we want you to do the coatings on these two components before you assemble them is because the Loctite product is not great with heat, and it's also a chemical on a metal substrate, and that could affect the coating properties or qualities or other things like that. So do your finishes on these two parts separately, and then do your assembly process, being sure to get a good liberal coat of Loctite on both the female dovetail and the male dovetail, and then assemble them in the correct orientation. Snug your bolt down, and then with a soft paper towel or a cloth, wipe the excess away once you've snug the bolt down, because you're going to have some that bleeds out of there. So you just want to wipe it down really good. If you've done an anodized finish, you can use like an acetone or whatnot, but otherwise just like a wet rag to get the Loctite off of there. And then this product cures in 12 to 24 hours depending on temperature. But that's why this particular part is unassembled in the kit. Here's a lever assembled. It's actually not bolted together. I don't know if you can see in there, but there's no hardware. It's just the Loctite product, and we've been beating the hell out of it, and we can't actually get it to come apart without heat. So adds an extra level of security and safety on this assembly, which is super overkill already, but we just like to do that. You will also have to install your pivot bushings. These are a bronze oilite bushing that we supply, and you can see on the shift lever, this is the orientation of the flange that you want to maintain. So the flange goes inward, and the pivot pins go in like so. And on the brake side, which side of the bike am I on here? The flange goes on this side, like that. So basically the flange is opposite the machined detailed side of each lever. You will also receive a brake line adapter, and this is the component that you use to connect your factory brake line to and the new brake line that we supply. And you will also receive the two lower frame covers. These all come in black. They're made of aluminum, and you can color, repowder coat them or color them however you want to, but all of them are supplied black in every kit. So one other thing I want to point out, if you've ordered the kit in the raw machine so that you can powder coat or coat to match the color scheme of your bike, is that some of the fitment areas on these components are critical. And so if you choose a coating option like powder coating, there can be surface buildup or thickness added to the finish of the parts. So you want to keep that in mind and do your best to either tape yourself or have your powder coater tape those critical areas, specifically where the bushings interface on the covers, and then also the bores, like where the bushing is going to press in, and then where your O-ring and covers are going to interface with your engine cases, both here and on the back side as well, and like inside where your stator is going to mount and stuff. So just keep that in mind. That's one of the reasons we offer it in black anodized, is because the anodized is a very low profile coating that actually somewhat penetrates into the parts as well as building up on top of them. Cerakote would be a good option that's low buildup. But don't be shy to powder coat these if you want to. Just be mindful of where you're getting the powder coat, or you may have to do some cleanup after the fact. And that basically are the extra details on the raw machine stuff. If you have any other questions about them specifically, just shoot us a message though. All right, so now we're going to begin our installation process. Smart first operation is always to disconnect your battery. Simply take off the negative cable, cover it with a little piece of heat shrink or some tape so it can't accidentally touch the battery. It's always safer especially if you're getting involved in some electrical and motor components. Safe step. So disconnect your battery, and then we're going to disconnect our rear brake line. We're going to be using a 12mm socket, and keep in mind that this does have .4 brake fluid in it, which is corrosive if left on painted surfaces for too long. So do your best to keep it off of those surfaces. Just gonna pop the banjo bolt out, and then just kind of let this sit back here for now. All right, now we're going to remove the floorboard assembly as a complete unit. You're gonna need an 8mm Allen. I have one here on a ratchet and extension. You can use a T-handle as well. When you get this off the bike, just as you're taking it off the bike, I should say, keep it tipped kind of backwards like this so that you don't end up with brake fluid pouring out of your reservoir. And then you're not going to reuse anything on here, nor are you going to reuse the hardware. So you can just set this aside someplace, sell it on eBay, do what you want to do. You'll notice now that the floorboard assembly is off the bike, that the brake line on this bike is just dangling. Your factory bike, if it has not been taken apart once before, may have a P-clamp right here holding the cable in place. You're going to want to remove that P-clamp as well. It's not going to be used again. The next step after taking the floorboard assembly off will be to remove the exhaust from the motorcycle. So to do that, you got to start by removing the lower rear heat shield, which is held on with a few band clamps. I'm using a 1/4" hex driver on a drill, and obviously the exhaust on this bike has been already partially removed, so you will have another hose clamp to take off and other things, but to speed things up, we've already done that. And you can set this aside someplace safe if you're going to be reusing it. This particular bike has a cat delete on it. Your bike may have the factory catalytic converter on there, which attaches in a slightly different way. But you still have to get all this stuff out of the way. This is a 5mm Allen on the V band, and once you get it loose enough, you can drop the Allen right out of there, and then this should just slide off. Stay on there. All right, so now when you've got to this point with the headers and the exhaust in this configuration, you can actually leave your two upper heat shields on. It makes life easier when you're taking things on and off. So you do need to disconnect the front O2 sensor, however, which is a 14mm wrench. The book says to unplug this and route the wiring up, but the wiring is secured in a couple different places inside of here. So in my opinion, it's easier to just unscrew the front O2 from the pipe itself and just kind of tuck it back out of the way. The rear one, you have access to the plug as the pipe comes off, so when we move it, we will just unplug it. So the next step is to unbolt it at the two exhaust flanges. For that, you're going to need a 13mm deep socket, as well as a short socket potentially, and a universal joint if you have one. Will make life a lot easier because they don't give you a lot of room. So I'm just going to start by loosening them all up. And here you can see why the universal joint makes life a lot easier. There's no way to come on straight. Then we're going to get the short one is to get in this lower front one because it's just in there pretty tight. You just want to be careful you don't back it off so much that you get the socket stuck up there. One detail to note is that the nuts they use are a flanged nut so that they will stay captured in the socket, which is handy. All right, so once you get your manifold nuts off and you get them free of the studs, you're gonna jockey it down and kind of slowly put it down and out. Oh, yep. And there's that O2 port you gotta unplug. So. And then that assembly you can just set aside as well. Now we're going to take off the stock stator cover. So you're going to need a 5mm Allen. I'm using a T-handle. You can use whatever. I like to just break them all free first and then spin them out. I always leave one upper one in last, although this cover has dowel pins that locate it, and it's also attached to the stator, which is held magnetically into the middle of the rotor, which you'll see in a minute. So the cover is not going to just pop off on you. There will be a little bit of oil that leaks out as well, potentially, but not a significant amount. So you don't have to worry about putting a drain pan or anything down there. You are going to reuse the cover hardware, so don't lose it. And then this is probably the trickiest part of this whole job, is this cover removal and the installation of the new cover. So like I said, it's held on there right now just by the force of the magnets inside. So you just have to kind of carefully pull it off the bike. And it will pinch your fingers pretty good if you're not careful. So that is the stator, and this is your rotor. So there's magnets in here, and that's what generates the electricity for your motorcycle when it's operating. So I like to just throw a paper towel kind of in between here. Even though we're not reusing this cover, it just kind of protects everything. And now we're going to actually remove the stator from the cover. So your kit includes these 3 bolts, brand new, as well as the gasket. You need the new gasket, so don't forget to use those. Also note, before you take this out, how the wiring is run coming up in this kind of pocketed area on this side of the fin and bolt hole. When you reinstall, we'll go over it again, but you just want to make sure that's how it looks, that you match the factory detail when you put the new cover back on. All right, so we're going to pop this rotor out, the stator out now. And again, these bolts do not get reused. So it just comes out of the cover. Set your cover aside. And for the time being, we're actually going to reinstall the stator back into the rotor just so it's not just dangling and it doesn't accidentally get sucked in. And so the way that I like to do this is with a couple of Allen wrenches, and I just apply some sideways force to them. So I'm kind of pinching them. I'm keeping my fingers out of the way, and I just offer the stator back into the rotor assembly for the time being. So it's safe, it's secure, nothing's going to happen to it. And we'll actually pop that back out when we're ready to put the new cover back on, install it to the new cover, and then go from there. So continuing our disassembly, we've moved on around to the shift side of the bike. We're going to first pop off this plastic guard with a small flathead screwdriver. There are 2 body panel clips. You just kind of pry the middle piece out. Careful it doesn't go flying on you like that one tried to. And then this lower one down here. And then this panel, you can just pop these out. You will reuse these clips, so try not to lose them. Just pops off. And if the middle section of the clip comes out on you, it's not a big deal. You can just push it back in. Set that aside. And that will give us access to the brake line adapter later. So once you've got your plastic guard off, you want to move down to below the floorboards where your factory shift linkage is. Before you actually start unbolting anything, you're going to want to break the jam nuts free on the shift linkage, and just keep in mind that one of them is reverse thread from the factory. So it's left-hand thread, so it's going to spin the other way. And for that, if they're tight, you're going to need a 13mm wrench. So once those are loosened, you can then take a 10mm wrench, and you're going to only need to unbolt the right way, the front bolt that actually attaches to the shift lever. You don't have to disconnect the rear rod end at all from the motorcycle. That can stay in place. So once that's out of the way, you can unthread this shift rod, and it may be the left-hand thread side that's on this end. It may be the right-hand side. They seem to be somewhat inconsistent from the factory. And you're also going to want to retain the nuts, the factory nuts. You're not going to reuse the factory rod end or the rod itself, but you are going to reuse the 2 jam nuts. So you can take those off and set them aside someplace where you won't lose them. Okay. Now, with that same 8mm Allen that you used on the other side, your floorboard assembly can now come off. And then the last thing to remove on this side will be the cold start cover. Again, we're using the same 5mm Allen we used on the other side. This cover is held in with an O-ring, so there is a little bit of tension on it, so it is also not going to just fall out on you. And it is also above any kind of oil line, so it will not leak any significant amount of oil out of it. Same technique we used on the Stator when we were putting it back in can be used on this cover to kind of wiggle it free of the O-ring tension. And you're not reusing this cover, so if you scuff it up or whatever, it's not the end of the world. It is kind of a pain. Your kit comes with the new O-ring, so you don't have to worry about retaining that O-ring or taking it back off, and you're not going to use this cover. So that's all there is to that. So now we're going to install the new cold start cover shifter arm assembly. We've gone ahead and installed the new O-ring that comes in your kit on this already. Don't forget to do that. So we're just going to there's usually a little bit of oil on the case right here, but if there isn't, you can use WD-40 or assembly oil or something just to kind of lubricate your O-ring a little bit before you put it in there. And then it just drops in place like so. And then you're going to want to re-secure your cold start cover screws. And the torque on these is like 84 inch-pounds, which is like 6.5 foot-pounds, so it's not very tight. You probably have a greater chance of stripping it out before, you know, if any more than anything else. So try not to over tighten them. Just make sure they're really good and snug. If you want to torque them, go ahead. It's not a bad plan. So that's all there is to that part of the assembly. Now we're going to do the shift rod assembly. So you're going to get from your kit the rod provided and the two nuts that you retain from your factory shift linkage rod. And remember that one side is left-hand thread, so if you've got a nut that won't go on, try it on the other side. And just send those all the way. And the reason we've maintained the left and right-hand thread detail is so that you can adjust your shift linkage length without disconnecting the rod ends, just like the factory setup. And then we've also provided the right-hand, a brand new right-hand stainless rod end. So you want to set your shift linkage rod up like this, and now if you're lucky, the factory rod end is the left-hand one, and then you'll be able to just thread this right on. If it's not, then that means that the other rod end that you took off earlier is the left-hand one, and you have to just install that onto this shift arm first. So once you've done that, you can thread this all the way in, and just go all the way in right now so your shift linkage rod is as short as it can possibly be. You can adjust the length later. And then you're going to take the 5/16 bolt and nut we provided in our kit. Now you're switching from metric to American with this, so you're going to need a 1/4 inch Allen and a 1/2 inch wrench to do this installation. And then this bolt just goes in through your rod end, and then you want to start the nut on the back side, and then you can snug up with a 1/2 inch box wrench on the back and your T-handle, just good and snug. And that completes the shift side assembly minus the peg detail. So now we're back on the brake side of the motorcycle, and we've grabbed the brake line adapter from our kit. Before we put this in place, you're going to want to take one of the two 3/8 fine thread banjo bolts that are in your kit and one of the 35-degree banjo fittings, and you're going to want to start this into the short side of your adapter. It's just easier to do out here when you can see everything. And the adapter is going to sit in the motorcycle like this, and you want to just roughly set the banjo fitting so that it's roughly for now in the 12 o'clock position. And hand snug is good. You can adjust it. We can adjust it a little bit more later. So set that aside for just a moment, because now we're going to remove the two mounting bolts for that from the motorcycle, and we're using a 10mm socket and an extension. And you're just going to remove these two bolts all the way. This lower one, you want to be a little careful as you take it out when you're coming by these stator wires, just so it doesn't tear up the casing. So remove those. I recommend a little bit of Loctite blue. And now we're going to put the brake line adapter in. And again, short side to the back, long side out, and this notch here, which is to allow some clearance for your O2 wire, is oriented upwards. Just get that one started. Slide the lower one in, past your wires. The last step to complete installing your brake line adapter is to torque the two mounting bolts. They're 8mm bolts, and we're going to torque them to 22 foot-pounds. And that's that. So now we want to reroute your factory brake line so that it attaches to, because we're going to attach it to the brake line adapter. So we're going to use the second 3/8 fine thread banjo bolt supplied in the kit, and we're going to bend this over until it lines up. Your factory brake line will have to be manipulated a little bit to get it over into this position. And then you're also going to want to manipulate the factory hard line down here. And ideally you're going to want to get this to kind of rest in a neutral position where it's not touching the frame too much up here or the frame down here. And so you may just have to kind of finesse the line around a little bit with your fingers until you get it to a kind of a nice neutral position. Let's take your time with it. You want to do it right, and you want to keep it close to the frame on this side, but not ideally it won't be 100% touching it, so you don't have a chance for a rubber or chafe issue. But you want to keep it close because your exhaust is coming through here, and you don't want it to be any closer to the exhaust than it needs to be. And then when you're pretty close, you can snug this down with a 9/16 socket. So when you've got this close, go ahead and lock it down with a 9/16. And as you can see, get everything kind of in a nice neutral position. So now we're going to move on to installing the new stator cover and brake assembly. So before we go any further, we've removed the old gasket. We're going to put the new gasket in. There's a small little tab on the gasket that indexes with a little notch in the case. So that's where that way you know where to start and line up, and then it just pops in. Let's make sure it's in all the way around. And now we're back to the tricky operation of this assembly. So as you can see, I've got some paper towels kind of handy, and you could use some tape or some other stuff if you wanted to, but we're going to remove the stator using our little puller method. To make sure you have a pretty good leverage on those when you're doing that. And we've got our stator screws ready to go. So we're going to rotate this stator over, and then I'm going to tuck some paper towels up around here. And we're going to take our cover, We're going to set the stator down into the cover. And there will be only one point where all 3 screws line up, where the wire is remotely close to this upper corner where we want it. So I'm going to get one screw and I'm going to hand start it. I'm going to do the same for the other 2. And make sure you use the brand new screws provided in your kit when you do this. And these are also an 84 inch-pound or 6.5 or so foot-pound torque spec. So pretty much as tight as you can get them. With the T-handle is going to be where they want to be. You don't want to over-tighten them, obviously. And they do come from the factory with a little bit of thread locking compound on them. So, okay. So now this is the important part. You want to make sure that that wire, I'm going to swing this around here, is staying close. You can see in there, there's 2 little ears that capture these little tabs on the wire retainer, and then the wire also has to come down through in this slot as you rotate the cover down and around. So you just want to make sure that that orientation is maintained. And then also remember that this is under a good amount of magnetic force, but you do have a pretty good place to hold on over here, and then you just want to guide your cover in like so. And then you want to rotate it until you get the 2 dowels lined up. There's a couple of dowels you want to line up in the cover. You'll know when they do because they'll drop in. And as you're offering the cover to the case, you also want to just make sure you're maintaining a pretty good orientation out of the gate, because you want the 2 tabs of that sheet metal wire keeper to end up in their proper locating slots inside the cover. And then once you've got that on there, take your mounting screws, a little bit of Loctite on each one just for good measure. And again, these screws are also all the same torque spec. And I just like to get them all started first. And as I do that, I make sure that the cover is dropping in evenly and make sure it's not binding up anywhere and not sitting flat against the gasket surface. Just kind of go around before you don't want to tighten any one of them down. And then because this is a gasketed cover, when I do snug them down, I kind of just bounce around in a little bit of a star pattern. And just make sure you go around and get them all. Like I said, 84 inch-pounds if you want to get a torque wrench and torque them. There you go. So now we're going to install the new brake master cylinder onto the cover. Your kit will come with a new rod end, a small flanged bolt, and a nut. This is all part of the assembly, as well as the two mounting screws. So we're gonna just loosely assemble all that, and then we're gonna throw a little Loctite on these two screws. And there's also, notice the washer detail too. You don't want to forget that. Then we're gonna start these into the cover. Snug them down. And then with the bolt here, you're going to want to make sure that the flat head of the bolt is to the towards the engine side of the motorcycle. It's that style of head for clearance on the exhaust. And then it's a 4mm Allen wrench and a 10mm box wrench. And this piece of hardware is a nylock screw, so it won't rattle loose on you. You just want to snug it down. And this assembly is designed for adjustment as well, so there's a lock nut on the assembly, and then as you spin this in or out, it will adjust the height of your brake lever. So you can, once you get everything fully assembled, you can tailor the height of your brake lever and then cinch your lock nut down. So that completes that part of the assembly. Now we're going to put the PSR reservoir in place. Your brake master cylinder, when it comes to you, will have a small plastic cap there. We're not going to be using that. Instead, you're going to want to take your PSR reservoir out of the box, and it will come with its own mounting screw. You want to retain the O-ring that is factory, and it's already lubricated, and this just pops in. And then you take a small Allen wrench, size 3, and this screw also does come with Loctite on it, and you just snug that down in there. So now we're ready to set up the brake line assembly. So now you want to take the remaining banjo bolt and banjo fitting from your kit, as well as the brake line in your kit, and we're going to install the banjo assembly into the master cylinder like so. You can leave it a little loose for now, and you want the bend oriented like shown. And then we're going to start our brake line onto the fittings. These are a 3AN style fitting, so just get that on there loosely. And then the reason we left the one down in here loose as well is so that you can manipulate the fittings until they start. You may have to play with it for a minute. Once you have them both started, you can snug them down. These are a 7/16 size fitting. And these you want good and snug, but you don't want to crank them till they break either. This one can be a little tricky. If you have a short 7/16 wrench, it can make life easier. Just take your time and make sure it's good and snug. And also make sure as you're tightening it, you're not distorting the routing of the line. And the line is routed this way so that it clears your O2 wiring and the exhaust pipe as well. So, and depending on your exhaust, you may need to manipulate it a little bit as well, but this setup will work with the stock exhaust. So that's about what you're looking for. Once you've got this assembled, you go back with a 9/16 wrench and tighten up the banjo fitting here, as well as the banjo fitting on the back side with a long extension. So now we're just snugging up the banjo on the brake master, and I'm keeping some pressure on my thumb down here so that I don't allow the fitting to rotate out of position. Good and snug, and now we're going to go around the other side with a couple of extensions and reach through and tighten up the banjo fitting on the back side. Okay, so we're coming in from the other side of the bike now. And we've also added a universal fitting because of the angle involved. And I've got a hand, just kind of put my finger in place here, again to keep the fitting from rotating to where I don't want it. So get it good and snug, and then as you're bleeding your brake system, you're going to obviously want to visually inspect and make sure that you don't have any leaks anywhere. If you do, you're going to have to go back and tighten up those areas and fittings, but good and snug is usually more than sufficient. You certainly don't want to break anything or strip anything out. So I usually start there, and if there's anything leaking, I address it then, but usually not a problem. So now that we have installed our master cylinder assembly onto the new cover, your next step is to bleed the rear brakes. You're going to want a small funnel and a brand new container of DOT4 brake fluid, as well as I highly recommend you use a vacuum brake bleeder, especially if you're doing this by yourself, because you can route the bleeder around here and control it while you're topping the reservoir off. Please note that the reservoir is smaller than the factory reservoir. That's sort of a function of keeping everything as compact as possible and as nice looking as possible. So it doesn't hold a lot at a time, so it's very handy to be able to control the bleeder and top off and see what you're doing. I also highly recommend that you check your brake fluid level every 1,000 miles or so, because it doesn't hold a whole lot and your brake pads do wear. So once you've completed that assembly and you've tested your system and you have no leaks, the next step is going to be to reinstall your exhaust system. So we're going to do this with the factory headers and heat shields because that's what we have. If you have another exhaust system that you're using, cannot guarantee that it's going to fit. We did set this up to work with the OEM system, and that's what we're going to be doing today. Okay, so ready to put the pipe on. Got my O2 sensor plugged in back up here and clipped into place. And now we're going to get these pipes in. Rear flange is on. I'm going to throw a nut on the rear flange. I got that one on and started and I don't want it to slide back off on me. Now I just gotta get the front onto the two studs. There it is. I'm just going to snug them down like this for now. Obviously we're not putting on the rest of the collector system here, so this is more for visual aid. And I'd like to get the lower one on as much as I can before I totally snug the top one down, just because the lower one's much harder to get to. So obviously from there you continue on and install the rest of your collector system, the merge, heat shield and all that. The heat shield will go on as well. You may just have to articulate the brake lever out of the way. And then the last step will be to fish out your O2 sensor, which I gotta go around the other side to get. This comes around the back side of the brake line adapter and through that notched area. And back up into the pipe. And a little trick with these, since we've removed it the way that we did, is to twist the wires up a little bit, so there's a kind of twist built in, and then when you set it into the exhaust pipe and start threading it in, it will not be all twisted up when it's in its final location. And that's our 14mm. Snug it down. And there you can see kind of why everything is routed the way that it is. So you have clearance on everything. So the last step will be to install your foot pegs and frame cover. So if you ordered a kit that came with pegs, you're going to get the Flow Moto pegs in the color option of your choice, as well as the toe peg. And we have supplied what we feel is the best hardware option for these instances, which is a shouldered bolt with a built-in washer. These are stainless, and this means that the peg will not be, the force of the peg will not be riding on a section of threads in either scenario. So these are really nice bolts, and we've also supplied a spring washer. So you can adjust, just as a note here, you can adjust, these are set by us kind of roughly, but you can adjust the angle of that your peg will fold up with something as simply as just putting a adjustable wrench on here, and with a little bit of force you can actually get these to move a little bit. So if you want to adjust that angle, you can. The nut on the back side of this is a nylock, so you're not going to loosen anything up by adjusting it a little bit. So you want to just take your foot peg and your spring washer, and these assemblies do, by the way, accept pretty much any standard aftermarket HD style male clevis. So the options are kind of unlimited. And then you've got the bolt with the built-in washer, and then a small washer and nut on the bottom side. Just want to get that started. Can't really see what I'm doing. Sometimes the spring washer doesn't go all the way in. You have to kind of coax it along with something else. There we go. Like that. Then your washer and your nut. And again, these are nylocks, so as you're folding your peg up and down over time, you do not have any issues. And another important note is, because you're using a stainless nut on a stainless bolt, you're going to want to put a little bit of WD or something on there when you're assembling it so you don't have any galling. So that's how you want to install that. And again, note that you have the set screw down here that you can adjust in or out to tailor where the peg sits down on. And once you find a spot that you like, just pull it out and throw a little blue Loctite on it, or do that first and then adjust it, and once it sets up, it'll be exactly where you want it to be. I also highly recommend putting some blue Loctite on the bolt that holds the peg to its mount, so that these don't fall off as well on you going down the road. So moving on to the toe peg. Again, we've supplied the hardware. You're going to want to drop the bolt down inside the peg so that it's sticking out like that. And then this is a slotted assembly, so you can adjust the peg to your preference, in or out, and then get the nut started on there. And again, a little bit of lubrication on the threads is not a terrible thing. And then just snug it up and set the angle to your preference. And this can all be adjusted, once you're able to sit on the bike and see exactly where you want everything to be. And again, you can adjust the height of this in relative to the foot peg with the adjustment on the rod end. And then the final step here will be to install your frame covers, which are supplied in the kit. Again, a little bit of Loctite on these recommended. There's 2 of these covers in your kit. They are identical. There's no left and right. You can use them on either side. And they just go right over where your floorboard's mounted to kind of complete the look. If you're running a crash bar or the frame bar, these covers will still work. However, you will have to space them out and use slightly longer hardware. The factory floorboard bolts will work just fine for that. But otherwise, that's all there is to it. Okay, so once you have your pegs installed on both sides of the motorcycle, the next step would be to sit on the bike and adjust everything to fit your specific foot positions as necessary. And that will complete your mid-kit installation. As you can see, we're using our mid-kit on this particular build, as well as our dash kit with a set of custom T-bars built specifically to fit the client, as well as we've done our gas tank knee cuts, our trim saddlebags and customer fender, and we're also utilizing our lower bag supports that allow the use of a 2-into-1 exhaust system. And we're also working with Saddlemen on a custom fit seat specifically to our customer, as well as we're going to be doing paint, powder, cams, and a bunch of other stuff to this, including a custom built exhaust. So if any of this other stuff interests you, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. All of our information is in the description below. We appreciate you checking our stuff out tremendously, and please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe this video, and reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank you very much.